Welcome to another in the series of Outstanding Leaders in Dentistry, a project of the USA section of the International College of Dentists. This morning I'm delighted to have with us Dr. Robert J. Genco of the State University of Buffalo, Distinguished Professor. Bob, welcome to this interview, and we are really delighted that you've taken time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to come from Buffalo to Washington to be with us. It is our pleasure, sir, to have you here.
Well, Dick, I'm honored to be asked, and I look forward to our discussion.
Now, we always want to start these things with the comment that you people are so well honored and awarded that it's sometimes very difficult to be humble in these crowds because it's important. And Bob, please freewheel and tell us about your life, because that's what we want to know. Let's start in a little town in New York of Silver Creek.
Yes, I was born in Silver Creek. It's an interesting town, 3,000 population on the southern shore of Lake Erie, not too far from Cleveland, where you grew up. The town is still there, and my mother still lives there, my brother. Small high school, about 55 students in the class. We all got to know each other. And not much happening, so you made things happen. Music was big. Various types of interest clubs, the French club and the Indian dance club that I belonged to. These are things that we did as high school kids. Of course, it was great to leave also, to get to a bigger city, and the big city, of course, for us was Buffalo, about 1 million population. And when I left at age 18, I never really returned, but of course I visit. But it was a wonderful town to grow up in. Lots of things to do in the summer, right on the lake. So there's lots of water sports and fishing and water skiing, and it was great.
Tell me about Mom and Dad and any other family that you had there. And
yeah,
give me some memories of that time.
Yeah, my dad and Mom, hardworking people. He was a laborer, a supervisor, eventually in a factory that made guns, triggers, and eventually after the war converted to making copiers. Mom was a housewife with three children. I was the oldest. In our family, I guess the oldest son in an Italian-American family, the oldest grandchild is the golden boy. So
you're it.
I'm the golden boy. I had a kid with my brother and sister, and of course they razz me about that too. But that's my birth order.
Were those good days for you, Bob?
Yes, basically they were. Growing up in a small town, I have to say, you could get bored. I can remember waiting for Tuesday evening, which was Boy Scout evening, and just couldn't wait because there was an activity. This was before television, before many of us had television. I know the neighbor did. We didn't for years. As I said, we had to make our activities, and music was a big part of my life. I played the trumpet, played in jazz bands, played in German Oompa bands, and played in the school band and the orchestras, the county orchestras.
Now, I wonder how many of your students know that you're an Oompa band player. I think that's wonderful.
Probably none. I don't brag about it.
Tell me about the high school days. Many people find that that's a tough time, but what do you remember? Are there any mentors? Are there any people that are starting to give you an inclination of maybe what you would do for your life's work?
Well, I think there are probably three teachers who I remember. One was the music teacher, the instrumental music teacher. He was quite an influence, and that was great fun for me. I loved music. The other teacher was a French teacher. I took French throughout high school, and this, being from a small town in rural New York State, the sophistication that French gave me was an eye-opener. And I've loved going to France, and of course the only French I remember is the menu French. I can read the menu.
That's the important part,
right? Yeah. And the third was the science teacher, and of course in a small high school like that, there was one teacher, and his name was Gunnar Lindstrom. He taught biology, chemistry, and physics. So we got to know each other quite well, and he was quite an influence.
So he may have been the one that said to you, go to college and major in a science?
Yes, he did.
And was he influential in choosing your college with you, or?
Yes, he and several other teachers. We had a fairly good system for counseling, I also knew of the college that I wanted to go to, and I really only applied to one at the time. Of course, my kids have applied to 8 or 10 each, and my grandkids are in the process of doing that now. I applied to Canisius College, which was a Jesuit college in Buffalo, New York, and was accepted, and I had 3 good years there.
When did dentistry get into the idea that maybe this is where you were going to spend the next several years?
Now, I'm going to tell you a story that sounds unbelievable, but it's true. I started out as a pre-med, freshman year, and I worked between freshman year and sophomore year in a laboratory, and I did research for a botanist by the name of John Blum. And I studied terrestrial algae. Had a lot of fun in the lab. And I really got bit by the research bug at that point. Then I met a physician. I was working in a service station, pumping gas. And I met this physician who came in regularly. And he said, you ought to think about dentistry. I've got a friend who's a periodontist. That's why I say this story is unbelievable.
It's good, yeah.
Who has a wonderful life, and it seems to me that you could combine periodontics or a specialty like that in dentistry with a research career. Now, this was a sophomore in college. Well, I said, you know, that sounds good to me. So the curriculum was the same, pre-med, pre-dent. I then applied to dental school after 3 years. And in fact, when I got to dental school, I met this periodontist that was a friend of the physician. His name was Nick Marfino. And Nick was one of the first students of Balint Orban, one of the first trained periodontists in the United States. Before Nick's generation, most of the periodontists were self-trained. So Nick turned out to be one of my professors in dental school. The periodontist that this physician acquaintance of mine said had such a good life that you could combine it with research. True story. So I knew then, when I went to dental school, that I wanted to go into science. So I worked in the laboratory all those years through dental school. Of course, in those years, we were a private university, and all of the faculty were part-time, including the dean. And they would go to their practices at about 3:30. So the clinics closed at about 3 o'clock. So we had some time. Unfortunately, students now have zero time to do research, it appears. So I worked evenings doing research and weekends, all the way through dental school. And then eventually when I graduated dental school, went on to get a PhD. So I pretty much knew what I was going to do as a sophomore in college, that career path.
Well, you're one of the few that really had a pretty solid idea
very
early
fortunate,
on.
Very fortunate, yes.
Now, you went on to Buffalo Dental School, which at that point I did not know was private.
It was private the first year I was there, right.
Were those, send yourself back to those days, were those good days in dental school for you? Was it enjoyable? Well,
dental school, you know, is difficult. You not only have to learn the intellectual skills, but you also have to learn the motor skills, the hand skills, because when you graduate, you have to perform. Unlike medicine, the only thing a physician has to do is take blood with his hands. He or she has to think, of course. So it's a very different kind of training. And to combine the intellectual and the motor skills makes for a very, very rigorous curriculum. And there's some apprenticeship, and I think in the process of being taught clinic, you'll run into some faculty who have less patience than others. Let me put it that way. So there is this feeling that, you know, there's lack of patience. I think I probably have that too when I'm teaching beginning students that, oh my goodness, they're taking 3 hours to do a procedure. I could do it 5 minutes. And you get burned out as a clinical faculty too, easily because of that. So there is this element of difficult interaction between student and faculty, and I had that too. But by and large, it was a positive experience. I'm very loyal to the school, and of course, I'm a faculty member there now.
I was going to say, it must have been. You're back there
right.
now. So you had pretty much decided early on that research was part of what was going to be the future. And you went on then to Philadelphia. Tell me about how you got to the University of Pennsylvania, and you majored in microbiology and immunology and things like that. Give us some feeling for what those days were like, and any people that were good in that day.
Sure.
In your thought pattern.
What happened as our school became a state university in my sophomore year, and Jim English came on board. Now, Jim, as you know, was in the Navy. He ran the research program in the Navy. He was a DDS PhD. He was a scientist as well as a dentist. So he really brought in a research atmosphere to our dental school. And that just reinforced my early feelings about going into research. I also loved the patient contact, the interpersonal relationship with the patients. I didn't want to give that up. And as a senior, I went to the ADA meeting, I think it was in Miami, the first time I'd been out of New York State, I think. And I went to the Dentsply, it was a TrueBite denture table clinic. I was one of the participants. And Nick Marfino was there at the meeting, and he introduced me to Walter Cohen. Now, Walter Cohen was then the chair of the periodontics department at Penn. I knew I wanted to go into perio. And with Walter Cohen, we discussed the possibility for combining the clinical training with a research training at Penn. So that's what I ended up doing. I applied to Penn. Again, I applied to just one school. and then I matriculated for the PhD at Penn in microbiology and clinical training with Walter Cohen and his group. And that was a good experience. I enjoyed those years at Penn, and we still have a lot of good personal friends. And American Academy of Perio's meeting in Philadelphia this October, and we've already got a whole series of dinners and meetings with our close friends from Philadelphia.
So you got your certificate in perio at the same time your PhD.
Right.
In immunology and bacteriology.
Right. It was a fairly new program, federally supported program that George Krikos ran. He was the director of the training grant. So there was this atmosphere at Penn of heavy emphasis on science as well as a heavy emphasis on clinic at the time. Very unusual.
Now, the Public Health Service was part of your life at that time. Give us some of those ideas of how that was.
That was a fellowship from the federal government to engage in this combined training, and that was supplied by the National Institute of Dental Research at the time.
And so all three of these were together at the same time sitting in Philadelphia.
Right.
So Philadelphia now then became, I won't say unpopular to you because your time was wonderful there, but you had to go back home.
Well, there's another person, before we leave Philadelphia, there's another person that really played a big part in my life, and that was my mentor for the immunology was Fred Karish. And Fred Karish was a physical chemist who got interested in immunology by studying with Elvin Cabot. Now, Elvin was a premier immunologist and immunochemist, and he was at Columbia. So Fred Karish and Elvin were really great examples for me of the new science. And many of the things that they did were way ahead of their times. For example, Elvin did genomics on antibody molecules. Now it's become very popular to do genomics. It's a new field, but it wasn't known as genomics when he did it 20 years ago. So I was really pretty much committed to an academic career. Graduated Penn, and they were about to graduate, so I was looking around the country for positions, and there were maybe a half dozen dental schools that were heavily involved in research, and many dental schools had research going, but dental schools that would recruit you as primarily a scientist, and Buffalo was one of them. What Jim English did was quite unique. He established, well, first of all, when he became the dean, he had 100 faculty lines to fill immediately, the first day he became dean. It was a wonderful opportunity. He took 20 of them and put them into a department called oral biology, and he said, the mission of this department is research. The basic sciences are taught by the medical school, clinical sciences are taught by the rest of the faculty. So that was the department that I went to at UB. It was this new department of oral biology, and I now chair that department, and we are still striving to keep that mission pure. And it's been a success. I think that dental schools are small, faculties are busy, but if you can sequester one group and give them that mission, then I think that can be carried out. I mean, there are many other ways of doing it, but that certainly is a model. So that appealed to me. Plus, family was there. Both my wife and I are from the Buffalo area, so it was nice to return home. And we've stayed there since.
The two gentlemen that you just mentioned were, I'm sure, pretty proud of you when you received the gold medal for award for excellence from the research from the American Dental Association. Are these two gentlemen still with us? Or?
No, as a matter of fact, they weren't at the time I received the award. They passed on well before that, Fred Karish and Alvin Cabot. However, Nick Marfino is still alive, and so is Walter Cohen.
Yes.
I'm still working.
Dr. Cohen was a guest on this series several times ago, yes.
Yes. As a matter of fact, we are planning a new revision of the textbook that we wrote together, so we're still pretty actively interacting.
Yes. Now, when you went back to Buffalo, you went in the oral biology department, but you've done so many things in Buffalo. You've been chair and department director, and how about giving us the progression of some of these responsibilities that you've had through the years that have certainly impacted on the dental school and has helped it maintain a reputation of excellence?
Well, you're kind. I have some very fond memories of my first few years as a faculty member. Now, you have to put this in perspective. It was Kent State time. You know, it was a time of great ferment. And we had as our president Martin Meyerson, who wanted to make the University of Buffalo the Berkeley of the East, very liberal. So we had a liberal president, we had a liberal faculty, and we had a very conservative town. Well, there was all kinds of ferment. There were bomb threats at the dental school, and I can remember patients running out of the clinics with their rubber dams on and their napkins. It was quite a time of ferment. I was just a little bit older. I wasn't, a student of the 60s, part of that ferment, but I was a young faculty and I was caught up in it. So that was going on. The other thing that went on, of course, when you go to a faculty like that, you start out as the lowest of the lowest, and I was the assistant professor of periodontics and oral biology, and I had no other title, and I did a lot of teaching.
And you made the coffee.
And I made the coffee, right. That better be good. So I taught on the clinic floor in those years, and I made some wonderful friends. They're still good friends of those students. As a matter of fact, I was discussing one of them with a friend, a mutual friend. This one student, Dale Neal, is in Stowe, Vermont, and he's a very active dentist there. But I had him he was a junior student in the perio clinic, so we've become great friends. I soon got involved in administration and decreased my activity in teaching, and I miss it. I miss that. Although I've been very active with the graduate students, I miss that interaction with the undergraduate students. I lecture to them, but I don't spend the hours in the clinic with them. And anyway, those were great memories. So those early years with all the political and student ferment and the teaching I have great memories for those years.
Well, students would have been very fortunate to have you as a clinical instructor with your reputation of wanting to pass on information, which would be great. And I can tell you that in my dental school situation, there weren't some of the professors that had that same idea. But I think it's rewarding to have a professor that is really willing to share his knowledge, and of course in the research area. Speaking of research, I know, and I don't want you to be too humble on this, I know you've had over 300 publications. You have published many, many books and chapters in books and so forth. Where did that, I know that goes along with research, but where did that come sort of as an integral part? Because that is time consuming to be able to do such a good thing, to share your knowledge with people.
Well, Dick, what happens is when a dean like Jim English establishes a mission for a particular group of faculty to do research, then then your career really takes that path. And the elements in a research career are, of course, to do the studies, to formulate the hypotheses and design studies, to get funding for those, very important part of it, and then to write the results. So that becomes a major part of your career. And of course, this fits in with his idea of the mission of the department. And fortunately, there are other faculty who could take up the major teaching responsibilities for the undergraduates, and that's the luxury our department and its faculty have had. We've been able to operate in the context of a dental school where we could actually have the time to do this, and that is our major goal. Now, in the process, we got involved in another kind of teaching. We got involved in graduate teaching. We have taught over 60 dentists at the PhD level. And many of them are also specialists, and that's a program that I'm very proud of. Now, many of the people that we have taught are out there now doing very well. Mike Reed is the dean at Kansas City. Larry Tabak is the director of the Dental Institute. So we have some very prominent students that have gone way beyond this, which is wonderful. So I feel that our group has contributed to train teachers of dental students, teachers and academics. And that's probably one of our more wonderful contributions.
If you'd evaluate that within the dental school environment right now, it seems to be, from my impression, and I'd like to hear your comments, that there's a great need for that now, and there's kind of a minus situation in many schools concerning that.
Yes, right now, it's estimated there's a need for about 300 to 400 faculty, and I think this is going to be exacerbated in that there are 3 new dental schools. Nova, Nevada, and Arizona is talking about opening a dental school, so there's going to be even need for more faculty. There are many reasons why there is this deficit of faculty, and I think one of the reasons is economic. As we discussed before, when the students finish dentistry, oftentimes they have tremendous debt loads. Now that will be not forgiven, but that will be delayed while they take their additional training to become teachers, but eventually it has to be paid back. And I think that's such an onerous load in many instances that the applications, even to specialty programs, are down. And the applications to the PhD programs for dentists are down. How do we deal with this? Well, we're working very hard to make it more reasonable to take on these fellowships, these stipends, levels of increase. We're trying to get the government to forgive that loan for for people who spend careers in full-time academics, and I think these are the approaches. And there's always going to be 1 or 2 or 3% of every dental class that wants to go into research, regardless of the economic climate, and thank goodness for that. I mean, if we have 4,000 or 5,000 graduating dentists, maybe we'll have 40, 50, 60 of these maybe unusual types that want to go into academics, unfortunately, because then that continues the pipelines, and they find a way, one way or another, to do it.
Good. We'll come back to research, but I would like to jump into a second of your family, your present family. Tell us about your family right now, your wife and kids.
I have a wife that I've been married to for 42 years, and very happily married, wonderful lady, and 3 children. And the greatest part of our family is that we're big. We have 8 grandchildren. And in fact, we're going to take 2 of our grandkids to Japan next week, 2 12-year-olds. They're boy and girl cousins, yeah. And they'll be with us at this dental meeting, and who knows, maybe we can interest them in looking at science or dentistry as a career. But the important thing, of course, is that we're going to spend some good grandparent time with these kids.
And tell me a little bit about the children. Where are they, and what are they doing now?
Yeah, all 3 are very successful. 2 daughters and a son. The 2 daughters have had careers, but decided to stay home, become stay-home moms while their kids were young. The oldest daughter is a trader, an equity trader, and has done very well, but decided to be a mom for a while. The youngest daughter is a scientist, and she has 3 children and they keep her busy. They're young. And my son is a designer, an industrial designer. And he's had his own business. Now he's working for companies, and he invents and he designs equipment for the computer industry, for dust-free environments that are required to make computer chips. He designs those instruments that keep the environment free of dust.
42 years, that's quite an achievement these days.
Oh, thank you.
Did your wife have any special interests?
Yes. She taught for a while, and when we were, she's got a great eye for design and fashion. And when we were in Philadelphia, she was a model, and she ran a clothing store. Was a buyer for a clothing store. She, when we went back to Buffalo, decided to be a stay-at-home mom, and has done a lot of work for hospitals, hospital volunteer, and presently. She's a co-chair of what's called the Buffalo Alliance Board at the Roswell Park Memorial Cancer Institute, and she's doing very well. She'll be in charge of the annual fund next year, and keeps me very busy. She's appointed me to that board, in fact.
Another board.
Yeah, another board. So, but it's a wonderful thing. She has had a bout of cancer herself and is doing so well. I'm very proud of her. She's fighting it, and it looks like she's going to do very well.
Well, it sounds like you have a wonderful family and a
you.
very supportive wife, which we know is extremely important in the profession of dentistry. And of course, it sounds like she may have helped you get through school like mine did.
Oh, very definitely. Yeah, financially and more importantly, the support. Yeah.
Let's now go to a difficult subject for a lot of people to talk about, the honors they've personally received. And I've chosen several that I'd like you to just make comment on out of many, and we couldn't touch them all. We'd be here for several days. But let me talk first, or ask you to talk about the American Dental Association's gold medal for excellence in research.
Yes, that was quite an unexpected honor. Let me give you a little bit of my philosophy about awards first. I was president of the IADR and the AADR, and followed Paul Goldhaber. He was a great mentor, and he and I both felt that we should give awards. We should honor people. For example, at that time, the IADR had about 10,000 members, and there were only about a half a dozen awards. So I think that people should be given awards, and the fact that I received one, I guess, isn't because I think people should get awards, but I think that it's wonderful that I did get that award. The American Dental Association, I think, has done a wonderful job with those awards, and with the exception of me, have made good decisions. And I have to tell you a little story about that award. The day that I was told I received the award, I also received some bad news. I edit a journal, the Journal of Periodontology, and of course, any paper that I submit to the journal, or any of my colleagues, and I'm an author, gets reviewed by someone else, one of the other associate editors. Well, that day, I opened my mail, and I got a rejection notice from my own journal. 5 minutes later, I got a call from Enid Neidl from the ADA that I'd won the Gold Medal Award. So that was an interesting day of good and bad news.
Yes. Well, you also received the Gold Medal from the American Academy of Periodontology.
Yes. Yes.
And I know you're extremely active, have been in that group, and tell me about that award too, which I've picked as it sounds good to me.
Well, it was quite an honor, and I really enjoy working with that group, as I've enjoyed working with the ADA. But the American Academy I have a special feeling for. They chose me as their editor, and immediately became immersed in Academy activities. Not only as editor, but I serve on the board of trustees as a non-voting member. But I've probably, Alice DeForest and I are the longest serving members on that board with a lot of institutional memory. At any rate, when they gave me that award, I was quite pleased. I mean, obviously the greatest honor is to be singled out by your peers to receive an award. So I was very pleased with that, and I've had a great relationship with the Academy.
OKU and dental school, cum laude graduation, DDS. Of the many other awards, which we really aren't going to take time to do, you've had a myriad of just pages of them. Do any stand out in your mind that are unique for something special that you might recall?
Well, actually, I'm very pleased to be on the Institute of Medicine. There are a handful of dentists who are part of this Institute of Medicine, which, as you know, is part of the National Academy of Sciences. It's honorary, but also it carries with it an obligation to serve. And I've been on a couple of committees of the Institute of Medicine, one in particular, excuse me, a committee to look at barriers to clinical research. And we published a report in the mid-90s, and I think that report has had some influence on promoting the support and the credibility of clinical research training as well as clinical research itself by the NIH. For example, the Dental Institute now has a very active program in clinical research. There are studies of amalgam, studies of TMD, of periodontal therapies, of periodontal therapy to modulate diabetes, of periodontal therapy to affect heart disease. All of these, I think, are new initiatives of the Dental Institute, and many other of the institutes at the NIH now have very active clinical research programs. So I think the Institute of Medicine report had something to do with helping to remove the barriers to clinical research. And I feel very strongly that science really should be brought to the chair side, to the bedside through clinical research, and we have to be constantly aware of taking our findings from the laboratory to the patient. Of course, no wine before it's time. The findings have to be substantial and reasonable before you would expend the effort and subject humans to trial. But I think we have to do that, and the support is there. The science is there. Clinical research now is at a very high, very sophisticated level. There are people who are clinical trialists, specializing in experimental design for clinical studies to make sure that they're done properly and are creditable. So I think that that membership in the Institute of Medicine, which Harold Lowe helped me immensely to obtain, I'm sure, and also as a mentor for these activities, it's been a very important part of my activities.
Your school, of course, gave you a wonderful award, and to me, that's one that these people really know you. So,
Right.
so you know they're gonna. And you received the award from the State University of New York at Buffalo as the honor graduate. Those are kind of special when your friends are the ones that pick you.
Yes.
Now, I know you're recognized throughout the world as the top excellence in research in periodontal disease and many other things. Georgetown gave you a nice honor, too.
Yes.
How about just mentioning that one? I'll bring it up so you have to mention it.
Yes, thank you. That was quite an honor. It was bittersweet. That was the Omega graduation of the Georgetown Dental School. And there were 4 honorees that year. Hal Slavkin, who went on to become the director of the Dental Institute, Deborah and John Greenspan, who have done some wonderful work in AIDS and the oral manifestations of AIDS, and Elizabeth Dole also was an honoree. So not only was it a wonderful occasion to receive that honorary degree at such a special commencement, the last commencement of the Georgetown Dental School, but also I got a chance to spend some time with Elizabeth Dole and the Greenspans and Hal Slavkin. So that was just a very wonderful occasion. I have to tell you a little story about that. The president of the university left for another job shortly after the dental school closed, so the new president was with us for breakfast, and he said, I would have never closed the school. So there you are.
Those of us that live in town felt that it didn't have to close either.
There are many reasons, I'm sure, and I'm sure there were good ones, but certainly there's a bit of controversy about that closing.
Now, along with all these things you've done, you've stayed on the hospital staff there in Buffalo. You've also had a trend towards serving the public. Tell me about your time with the Food and Drug Administration and the NICDR. Well, it's NIDR at that time, NICDR now. Tell me about some of those experiences.
Right. I've served on some committees at the DR, NIC, DCR, and I can't get that straight. I fumble with the new name. At any rate, that's been wonderful. And I think that's part of being an active researcher, is to serve on committees to review other grants and to serve on committees to discuss workshops, to discuss future trends in research. And out of that often comes requests for applications in those areas. And I've been fortunate enough to serve on several of those and hopefully have helped to set at least some of the agenda in periodontal research through that mechanism. The FDA experience was quite interesting. I was first a consultant, then I served 2 4-year stints on the dental products panel, and also served on the dental plaque subcommittee. And these were invaluable experiences. I was there at a very wonderful time. David Kessler was the FDA commissioner. He signed my letter, and I have that. It's a very special letter for me of appointment. I had great respect for David for what he did for many things: the smoking cessation, getting after the smoking industry, cigarette industry, and also for streamlining the FDA. The other thing that happened was that in that decade, there were more dental products approved by the FDA than in the 2 to 3 decades prior to that. Now, there are a series of reasons for that, one of which I think is they've got more dentists on the FDA staff, and they're able to do that, to hire them, because of the fees they charge companies who submit for approval. They're quite significant. So they're able to hire more staff, and what they did is they hired a half dozen or a dozen dentists, and they're excellent people. The staff is superb. So I was with the FDA on the dental products panel. I became the chair the year or so. At this time of great transition, I think that has meant a lot to dentistry. You can see now there's at least in perio, there's 6 or 7 new products on the market that were approved by the dental products panel even in the last 2 or 3 years, or by the FDA. So I think we saw a sea change in how the FDA dealt with dentistry and in general with medicine. I remember David Kessler presenting the time to approval was markedly shortened during his term as FDA commissioner, so that drugs were approved in an expeditious manner without sacrificing the rigor of safety and efficacy criteria.
I think those incidents, I bring them up mainly just to demonstrate your dedication to service to the public, and to let your expertise show that has impact on every one of us. And thank you for doing that stuff.
I'm
That's
privileged to have been given the opportunity to do that.
Let's switch. There's so many things I'd love to talk to you about, but let's switch to the professional societies. You're a member of many, but you've been really significant, as you had mentioned before, to the American Academy of Periodontology. You've been through many responsibilities and offices within that organization, and many others, which it appears that somebody of the caliber of you, they'll probably want you in every society there is in the world. But the American Association Advancement of Sciences, the IEDR, the AEDR, which you were president of both of those. You have friends around the world because of the quality of research you're doing, but the kind of person you are. Are any of those societies stand out as something kind of special? There's many others I haven't mentioned, of course, but give me some feeling about the dental organizations and their impact on what we're doing today.
Well, I think the American Association for Dental Research and the IEDR International Association are very important organizations, and I really enjoyed my activities with them. I think that it's very healthy once you've served these organizations then to let others come on, and that's what happens. I served as president for both, and I think, again, there was great transition occurring there. Those organizations, I think, have become very effective. They're very altruistic. They're at the high level of science. Very little politics involved in their activities, so they can take the high road on many issues with a lot of credibility. And they're the spokesperson for dental science, for amalgam mercury toxicity issues, for fluoride toxicity issues, what have you. And these things come up. The IADA and the AAD are credible spokespeople. They're very much involved in smoking cessation now worldwide, so they have great impact. The American Academy of Perio is more for the members, but they do have a great feeling of dedication and responsibility to the public. So there's a kind of a schizophrenic mission of the American Academy of Perio, and they handle it very well. Science is important to the Academy, the members' benefits are important, and the public is important. And I'm just amazed at how well they handle all of those issues. In fact, it's a membership organization. Yes. Their members pay dues to be served by the Academy, yet the Academy also serves science and the public. So they're two very special organizations. The ADA is special too. I haven't worked as much with them, but I can see that their SEAL program is very important. When I served on the Scientific Council, I was privy to some inner workings of the SEAL program. I think it's very creditable. As a matter of fact, having served both the FDA and been with the ADA, I can see that the SEAL program is important for the FDA. If a product has a seal, the FDA considers it in a different class, although officially it needn't do that. And I guess unofficially they would say that they don't consider the ADA seal, but in fact it is an important issue. So the ADA SEAL program is very important. So the scientific aspects of the ADA, I think, are very important to the profession too. They serve the profession well.
Yes. Looking at what you're doing for the profession, I know that you're on the editorial board or the editor of over 11 journals. How do you find time, Bob, to do all of this stuff you're doing?
Well, I really, since I've been the editor of the Journal of Periodontology, have not done much for the other journals. So over my career of 30-odd years, yes, I've been on many editorial boards, but you go on and off. And okay. So I'm really pretty active, of course, with the journal that I edit now, but I don't do much reviewing for the other journals. I used to, but I don't now. And so I've been realistic, and if I do get papers from the other journals, I usually tell them that I can't review them right away, and they usually recommend another reviewer.
We have spent a little time here, not much at all, really, considering what you've done in your career, talked about who Bob Genco is. Now I'd like to get your comments on some very important issues, which I feel, and many feel, that you have certainly are one of the expert people on. And let me read one of the grants: periodontal infection and risk of myocardial infarction. I know you're leading a task force in that area. Would you care to comment on some of those ideas?
Yes. Let me give you a little personal history, and then maybe I can give you some of my thoughts as to where this field might be going. When I was at the University of Pennsylvania, Mort Amsterdam and Walter Cohen were very, very emphatic in their insistence and insight that periodontal disease were very much infected by the host, by systemic factors. We didn't, in those times 30 years ago, have much idea about what that meant. Got interested in diabetes for a number of reasons. It's in the family. It was fairly well known that it was related to periodontal disease. So we looked at diabetes as a risk factor for periodontal disease. Then a graduate student, George Taylor, asked if he could do his PhD thesis on some of our data from the Pima Indians in southwest United States. By the way, that tribe, unfortunately, has a very high prevalence of diabetes. About 40% of the adults are diabetic, type 2 diabetes. So yes, we did find a relationship. Diabetics have more severe periodontal disease. What George Taylor wanted to ask is, well, if you're diabetic and you have periodontal disease, does your diabetes get worse? Now, there was some indication in the literature that diabetics whose periodontal disease was treated took less insulin, seemed to get better. But he wanted to really establish that. So in fact, he did show that. That was his PhD thesis. So we started to think, now wait a minute, maybe periodontal disease can have systemic effects. We know that systemic conditions affect periodontal disease. What about the reverse? So about that time, late 80s, Mattila in Finland had published some case control studies showing that patients with heart disease had more severe dental disease. They used a dental index, which included caries, periapical lesions, pericoronal lesions, and periodontal disease. And we didn't know, nobody knew what to make of that. Total dental index was higher in heart patients than non-heart patients. Well, a fellow by the name of DiStefano is an epidemiologist at CDC, took a look at some national data, big database, the NHANES-1, 10,000, 12,000 subjects, and he found indeed that people who had periodontal disease in subsequent years, 14 years later, were more often suffering from heart attacks, with a risk ratio of about 1.7, about a 72% greater risk of heart attacks. Well, there's been 5 or 6 studies now that have confirmed that. And all of those studies were secondary analysis of pre-existing databases. So we decided to look at this in a case control study, and that's what that grant is. And I'm going to present this next week in Japan, and in fact, we're finding the same thing. Now, it's a bit controversial, as all epidemiologic studies are. There are studies who don't show that relationship. So we've concluded that we're not going to get any further by doing more epidemiology. What we need are 2 kinds of studies. One is mechanism. Can we reproduce this in an animal model? Can we give an animal who gets atherosclerosis periodontal disease, and does their atherosclerosis get worse? There's a few models and there's a few abstracts now that are showing that. We need to know more about the mechanism. How could this happen? For example, we found that periodontal organisms are found in carotid atheromas. So the bugs are there. Now, do they do anything? We don't know, but they're there. And the second, so that's mechanism. The second area of experimentation that's needed is the clinical trial, the so what question. If you have somebody who's had a heart attack and has active periodontal disease, if you treat the periodontal disease, do you decrease the chance of a second heart attack or a second cardiac event? We have just been funded to carry out a pilot study to look at that. Now, we don't know what the answer is, and the answer may be negative, or the answer may be positive. But because periodontal disease is so pervasive in the population, affecting 20–30% of that age group that gets heart disease, and because heart disease is the #1 killer, even if periodontal disease contributed 10, 20%, 15% from the public health standpoint, that could be a major effect. And it's simple to treat. We know how to treat periodontal disease. So we're very excited about that possibility, but we're not taking any stand. Of course, we hypothesize there is a relationship, and that if you do treat periodontal disease, you'll reduce the risk for heart disease, but it needs to be shown. And we're, of course, as scientists, fully prepared to hear the negative, too, yes, if that's what the reality is. But the studies need to be done.
You also did some studies on osteoporosis.
Yes.
Give me a few, because my wife talks about that all the time.
Yes, it's a big issue. It's a major health problem of postmenopausal women and also men. You know, about 10 years later, men get osteoporosis. One of the sad things about osteoporosis is that osteoporotic women who have hip fractures or other fractures, oftentimes that's a fatal event. It's not well recognized, but they oftentimes don't leave the hospital. So it's a serious disease with some mortality associated with it. We were fortunate in Buffalo. We have a Department of Preventive Medicine that has one of these Women's Health Initiative centers. Oh. They're looking at 4,000 postmenopausal women. So we added on a dental study. They're already seeing the women, so we added on an osteoporosis study. We're looking at the dental status, dental bone density, as well as skeletal. And we've just finished looking at 1,500, and we're doing the data analysis now. So I don't know what the result is, but we're asking that question on this fairly large database. Is there a relationship? Our pilot studies and others show there is a relationship, that osteoporotic or osteopenic women have more severe periodontal disease. But we need to do this in a large population base to see if it isn't because they also smoke or some other confounding factor. These issues are very difficult to get at, and you need large population studies done in a blinded fashion to get at that relationship. But there is a rationale. It's reasonable, but we need the study. Once the study's done, then we have to ask the so what question. If you treat an osteoporotic woman, will the periodontal disease be prevented or get better? So that has to be done. So we have an agenda. I may not get to it in my lifetime, but there is a research agenda in this area of systemic and periodontal interactions. And I think it's very important from the public health standpoint to get the answers to these questions.
Well, I bring them up too because those were two particular things that I had chosen out of your many, many initiatives that really does have public health factors involved. Where is periodontal research headed now, Bob, in the next, say, by 2020? What do you see happening?
Well, I have, as I mentioned before, we've had several people in our family with cancer, so I've gotten very, very much involved in trying to understand cancer. And if you compare periodontal disease to cancer, there's a tremendous difference. We know what causes periodontal disease. We know how to prevent it. We know how to treat it pretty well. So we're in very good shape in terms of the knowledge base with periodontal disease as compared to, let's say, many cancers, where there's no idea what causes them and very little information on how to best treat them and very little information on how to prevent. So I think that contrast has given me new perspective. And so my view now is that we ought to take what we know in periodontal disease and apply it to the population and advance the future in terms of periodontal systemic implications. Now, having said that, we're not so good at regenerating lost tissue. So I think there's this whole tissue engineering to bring back the lost periodontal tissues. That is another frontier. So the two frontiers in perio that I see are periodontal systemic implications and the regeneration of lost tissue. But I think we're in pretty good shape in terms of primary prevention and treatment of the early cases of periodontal disease. I think we're pretty successful at that, and that's good. That's good. I think we've done our homework. We've done the proper research, and the clinicians have done the proper clinical trials. So we're in pretty good shape, I think, in terms of periodontal disease.
Does the word vaccine ever get involved?
Yes, there is a lot of work being done with periodontal vaccines. Bacterial vaccines in general have some major hurdles, particularly when you have a disease that's caused by multiple bacteria. Then you would have to have a very complex polyvalent vaccine. But there is a lot of interesting research being done in animal models where you can infect with one bug, cause periodontal syndrome, and you can prevent that by vaccinating. So that's well known in animal models. But when you get to the human, it's much more complex. And I suspect that will be a long time in developing a periodontal vaccine. But of course, that would be wonderful because if you could take a vaccine, especially by mouth, or nasal spritz, you might be able to prevent periodontal disease. So that certainly is an active area of investigation, and rightly so.
You've been in this business for 30 plus years. What do you want to do yet?
Well, I have a new job. I didn't tell you that.
Oh, I didn't. Okay, come on, right. Lay it on us.
I've just been asked by our university to direct a New York State Center for Advanced Technology. And the goal of this center is to fund research which is at the late development, early commercialization stage. For example, we're funding 4 projects this year, and it's a University Roswell Park Cancer Institute joint effort. One of the projects, one of the scientists at Roswell has a monoclonal antibody that will inhibit vascular growth in tumors. And he has shown that it works in animals. Of course, there's a lot of cancer therapies that work in mice that don't work in man. It has to be tested in man. Before he can test it in man, he has to make a batch that's approved by the FDA, made in a special laboratory. So we're funding his making of that batch of antibody, which is kind of a pedestrian thing. You could never get a grant to do that, but the state money will allow that to be done, see? Then he could test it in humans, do the phase 1 study. If it works, then, of course, he may develop a company or license it. So that's the kind of funding that the state has provided. It's a niche funding. It's funding that isn't available readily. It's that last commercialization stage, making batches of drugs, doing stability and packaging, the sorts of things that are fairly mundane but absolutely have to be done before you can test in humans, before you can go the next step to commercialization. So that's a task that I've been given, and I always have felt very strongly about tech transfer, science transfer from the laboratory to the patient. So this fits in with my interest for a number of years. Many of my colleagues wonder why I'm getting into this at this stage of my life.
I was going to ask that just now. Yeah.
But I believe strongly in it, always have. That's why I enjoyed the FDA experience, because that gave me intimate knowledge of the commercialization process and what you need to get something to the patient. It's onerous, but it can be done, and we have to understand it. And a lot of scientists, myself included, didn't have a clue as to what we'd do with the finding if we made it that could have some clinical impact. And now I think I have a good sense of that from my FDA experience. So maybe I can help others.
You have two major initiatives coming up. Sandra's Ball,
right.
Gala, and this
right.
new initiative.
Exactly, right.
Let me ask you one final question, Bob, because it's a difficult one. What do you want to be remembered for? What is Bob Genco, if that name comes up, how would you like it to read?
Well, I guess I simply want to be remembered as a scientist who maybe made a difference. I think that's the important thing. I hope I've been a decent person, and I, of course, want to be remembered for that, too, by my family and friends. I think those would be the things that if I could have made a difference through science and been a decent human being to my family and friends, I guess that would be wonderful.
Well, I think we can vouch for those. If that's all you want, you got it. But I would just like to say what a privilege it's been to sit opposite you this morning, to listen to a real scientist. Those of us that have been clinicians for several years, close to 40, are privileged that there are people like you out there that keep the research going that affects our practice and in turn affects the public. And that's what our job is, service to the public. And you're doing it. And we sure appreciate that. And thank you for the effort to get to Washington. I know that it's not always easy to get into this town. And so Bob Genco is a scientist, a DDS, a PhD, a father, a grandfather, and many, many more things. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dick, and thanks for the opportunity.
It's been a pleasure.